Salve, Regina, Mater misericordiae.
Today's Holy Mass in the extraordinary form is the third of three sort of preparatory Sunday Masses before Ash Wednesday. Today is called Quinquagesima Sunday, the last Sunday before Lent, and it's sort of a pre-Lenten penitential observance. It's why the vestments are already a violet color, and it's why the readings are chosen as they are to prepare us for the coming season of penance and sacrifice. And in particular, in the selection from St. Luke's Gospel today, chapter 18, particular verses 31 through 43, record our Lord's prophecy concerning his own suffering and death, and his attempt to prepare his apostles for his own season of penance is conjoined also with the record of the man who had been born blind and who was healed by our Lord when he told the Lord that his desire was that he should be able to see. And spiritually, these two events, these two separate accounts are connected, because when our Lord spoke about his suffering and death to his apostles, they heard, but they did not understand. Our Lord, on any number of occasions, spoke to the apostles of his suffering and death, and if they didn't outright reject the idea, as Peter did in Capernaum or Caesarea Philippi, when our Lord talked about his suffering and death, if they didn't do that, they at least failed to appreciate what he was saying. And so when Good Friday came, most of them were scattered and behaved as though really they had never really heard, certainly never understood what our Lord was talking about. He not only talked about his suffering and death, he also talked about his resurrection. So it's a kind of blindness. We know in the Gospels when our Lord performs a healing that this record of the event reminds us not only of God's power to heal our body, but the greater power which these miracles signify, that he is capable of healing us from within. And so he heals from leprosy in order to remind us of the horrible disease of sin in our lives that he can clean away from us. And he restores sight to the blind to remind us that from within we can see the truth through the faith that God has given us. And that is a real restoration, and one which we all need. And so, before we get marked with the ashes this coming Wednesday, our Lord is reminding us that this is a time of penance, and one in which we need to follow him and trust him with all our heart. And we need to go into it with a certain willingness to be led, like blind men who need not another blind person to lead them, but someone who actually sees. We don't see as well as we ought, but our Lord does, and we need to trust him. This particular Sunday, as we read about the blind man who was given his sight back, we can think about how the catechumens who will begin their journey during Lent towards, or not begin, but begin to complete their journey towards their baptism at Easter time, enter more deeply into their instruction in preparation for baptism. since the Second Vatican Council, a lot of the old institutions of the Catechumenate have been restored, but not completely. Sometimes they're taken out of the church during the period of instruction, and they're instructed separately and that type of thing, or taken out during the Eucharist, which was the custom, actually. They would remain for the readings, but they didn't stay for the celebration of the liturgy of the Eucharist. They were removed because they were not prepared to receive the mysteries. There was a kind of discipline of the secret, which was what it was called in the early church. And it was only after their baptism and receiving First Communion that they really were given the final instruction to help them understand completely what the Easter mysteries were and what the Eucharist is. They weren't completely ignorant of it before their First Communion, but there was a kind of what they called a mystagogia, sort of mystical instruction for those who had already been baptized. And that was their enlightenment. And it symbolizes something that we all really experience, is that as we go through the spiritual life, we are left a little bit in the dark about what God has in store for us. We experience that in terms of uncertain futures. We experience it in terms of crosses that we don't know how we're going to carry. We experience it in terms of problems within our family or within work or society that we have no solution for. And we are called to accept these things as penances and to perseveringly and joyfully walk in the footsteps of our Lord, trusting that He is guiding us. And when we do that, then God is going to be there for us to raise us to a higher level. So in the spiritual life, there's always an element of trust in divine providence that is necessary. We'd like to see things all laid out and solved for us, but God doesn't do that. He challenges our faith, and that challenge to our faith requires that we step up to the plate and offer Him the sacrifice because we love Him and because we desire to serve Him. So we have an opportunity to begin again during this coming Lent, to start over and remember that only one is our teacher, the rest of us are all learners. And we go back, to the beginning and start anew by picking up our cross that we have dropped along the way, or by renewing our life of penance, which we have allowed to become lukewarm, perhaps, God forbid. But this is our opportunity to begin again and to receive the enlightenment that our Lord has in store for us. May this be our grace today and during the season of Lent as we prepare for the enlightenment that God wills for us and the power that He manifests in our hearts and our minds through His Eucharist and through the power of His resurrection.
Fructum ventris tuum